Eiichiro Oda has done another series of things that we are going to talk about, and he did these things in a 19-page chapter. So credit where credit is due. I always point out the short chapters, but this is a longer than normal chapter, and it's because it is so packed with stuff. Starting with the cover page, Denjiro has now become the daimyo of Kibi, which, as I keep saying, is the region of Wano we know least about. 149 chapters over 4 years simply was not enough time to explore all of Wano somehow. However, what we do know is that Denjiro has inherited the position once held by Fugetsu or Musubi, who was part of Yamato's Stuck in a Cave flashback, and his name was recently brought up in relation to Admiral Fujitora, because it was a Musubi's ancestor who made Fujitora's supreme grade blade the Yakuza Kasen. And one thing that I'm really looking forward to with this cover story is progressively learning who all of the new daimyo are, because many of them, if not all of them, are probably Oden's vassals. In this cover story, we still haven't seen Kawamatsu, Kiku, Inuarashi, or Raizo, which would perfectly fill the 4 remaining territories of Wano in need of governance. But my biggest curiosity would be which one of them inherits the position of daimyo of Kuri, because that was Oden's former role. So there's some pretty big inherited will-shaped shoes to fill there. And I do really like that Denjiro was the one who came in to solve the issue with the kids, because he, like Yamato, to the people of Wano is a former villain. He was working for Orochi under the Kyoshiro name, and he did, admittedly, a lot of good in that role, but he also propagated Orochi's rule for how many years was it, like 15 years or whatever? Although my feeling is that Oda won't really address that and will just be in this magical happy space, as often happens with former antagonists, but he's a great person for Yamato to encounter, because he understands that stigma, and it's also a pairing that we really haven't seen together at all. Off the top of my head, the only time I can even remember them being in the same place was fighting against Admiral Greenbull. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that short story within a short story plays out. But this chapter commences in a most unexpected location, with a conversation between 2 dead old men, who here are still young men. Firstly, it is so cool to see more of Punk Hazard before Caesar ruined it with his weapon, and also before Sakazuki and Kuzan proceeded to ruin it even more, because originally it looked a lot like Egghead Island, or a beta test for Egghead Island. For whatever reason, Vegapunks seems to really favor the high-tech tropical palm tree aesthetic, but seeing Professor Clover of all people on Punk Hazard, that is really trippy. The odd blend of seeing a society focused on ancient history on an island focused on pursuing technology into the far future. But it was a really good reminder that Clover was actually kind of a boss back in his younger days, where he was a ravenous adventurer sailing across the world to discover its assorted secrets. He's on Punk Hazard, so it has to be said just how difficult it is to get there because it's in the New World, remembering that Clover is neither a pirate nor associated with the world government. So to think that this archaeologist made it so far, that deserves some appreciation. And I did also find his extended backstory quite tragic, because that's what I felt that all of Ohara was really lacking, more tragedy. But to talk about that, we also first need to address the wild revelation that Clover also bears the will of D, which puts a whole new spin on his passion to uncover the Void Century, because it directly affects his existence, but also his brother, who was effectively purged when it was discovered that he held the middle initial D. And it's heartbreaking that Clover had to not only watch this, but also that the last words he said around his brother was likely denying that he was his brother in order to survive. That guy, he's just a friend. And you know what? Not even a friend anymore because of that filthy D. And the whole thing takes me back to Belle-Mère with her insistence that Nami and Nojiko were her children, even at the cost of her life. But there is something that I don't quite get here. Clover does make a very harrowing plea to Vegapunk about, it's not fair to live in a world where people are killed because of their names, implying that there is an inherent prejudice against those with the will of D. But that's not something that's really been consistent with One Piece. One of my biggest, hey, that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense in retrospect points has always been how the world government just let a man named Monkey D. Luffy run rampant for as long as they did, despite the fact that 1, they know he's a D, and 2, he's not just any D, he's a Monkey D, the same as Garp and Dragon, whose names they also know. The moment Luffy received his first bounty, an admiral should have been sent to purge him. But I'm guessing that the purge policy stopped at some point. Like, this was a big issue during Clover's time, there was some sort of big old D hunt, and perhaps that stopped because the world government thought they got them all except for the ones that joined the world government, and the few D wielders that did come up here and there were already in pretty unstoppable positions by the time the world government realized them, like Roger and Rox. So I do feel Clover's pain, but it is counter to everything we've seen in One Piece so far. In fact, it's quite the opposite. At least in the modern day, the world government has been bizarrely tolerant of those with the will of D. I mean, they were gonna make Garp a marine admiral, and even let a man named Marshal D. Teach become a warlord of the sea. So I'd really love to know what happened between Clover's time period and now for that concern and prejudice to have subsided. But something I love is the conclusion of this flashback, where Vegapunk effectively takes on the inherited will of Clover by preserving and actually furthering his work, which I I imagine is now going to be passed on to Robin and Elbaf. So I guess Vegapunk was more keeping the inherited will chair warm for her. And cutting to modern day, there is a very difficult panel of Robin lamenting because Vegapunk doesn't outright say who he's talking about, but Robin recognizes Clover's words, which is actually a play on Olvia's last words to Robin, where she said that they were trying to retrieve and protect the voices of the past. That was a very big concept on Ohara, hearing the voices of the past. And a very fitting concept in this chapter, given that we also have Emeth, who is a literal voice from the past. And I love how this whole arc is tying itself together thematically, because really it's a greater representation of the goal of One Piece as a whole. What we are seeking is the past through the future. We want to know about this highly advanced civilization that possessed technology we couldn't even dream of, and it's becoming increasingly likely that what the future of this world holds is a return to the past through the dawn of the world. And so it's absolutely brilliant that all of this information comes to us in an arc centered on a man who is said to be 500 years ahead of the world, and a man who is rapidly being erased from existence himself. And with that, we should probably talk about Atlas. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, because from the moment Atlas left the relative safety of the giant warrior pirate ship, her sacrifice was as good as confirmed. And the first thing I thought of was that moment in Dragon Ball Z where Goku tells Gohan to take care of his mother and then sacrifices himself to kill Cell. And it's because of that panel of Atlas, it has her looking back at the exact same angle, and she also has a very similar line, being take care of Lilith. And also, like Cell, Ethan doesn't die. And the other thing it reminds me of is Pedro, who also blew himself up to an enemy that didn't die in order to allow the Thousand Sunny to go free. And I believe it's that explosion that actually gives the Thousand Sunny the extra kick it needs to actually make it into the water. Although I do need to ask this question: is that what Atlas was going to do regardless of whether or not Ethan was there? Because they got away without his interference, and the Sunny still wasn't going to make it until Atlas self-destructed. So I'm thinking that even if Ethan wasn't there, Atlas was probably planning on blowing herself up anyway. And look, in One Piece, this is usually the point where we would start discussing whether or not Atlas is actually dead. But in this case, I feel pretty comfortable calling it. And it's because of her final panel, where she's smiling right before death as if she has the will of D, and you know what? She kind of does. Because we just talked about this earlier. Vegapunk took on Clover's inherited will, and he was a D, so this is Atlas, part of Vegapunk, now doing her part to fulfill the part. And leaving Ethan with one last message being, whether you like it or not, the bad things are coming for you, old man. Because the caretakers of the will of D also tend to die smiling, like Kozuki Oden's haunting smile as he was disintegrated by a boiling pot of oil. Honestly, props to Oda, because I think this was a brilliant modern day death. And I think that smile's a secret recipe, which I think was the thing that was missing from the deaths of Izo and Ashura Doji, that full stop of finality. And so it looks like the last surviving Vegapunks we have are now evil and greed. Pretty bleak outlook for the world, but also one that was masterfully crafted, because York is on the side of the world government and she represents greed, which is the main driving force of the world nobles. And then opposing them, you have evil, which is what the world nobles labeled all of our good guys, the will of D, the demons, the evil enemies of the gods. So of course we end up with the aspect of evil. Of all of the Vegapunks, it's the most natural thing that fits into our side. And at the end of the chapter, York also collapses into laughter because she believes that she is the last remaining Vegapunk, which is, not something that the smartest person in the world would ever think. There is no way that York doesn't know about whatever Atlas did to Lilith to disconnect her. But then again, I think this might just be the folly of greed. York is ever so satisfied with the idea of having punk records all to herself and being the one and only Vegapunk name person that she's not thinking straight. She's just lost in her pure greed. And something else I really appreciated in this section was Jinbei, who took the lead in announcing that, mates, we're leaving. Currently, I live for Jinbei moments because he's the Straw Hat who we still don't have a solid grasp on in terms of his dynamic with the rest of the crew, but here I love that he took command. Because in this group dynamic, theoretically he should be deferring to Zoro, or actually he should be deferring to Nami because she's the captain when everyone's aboard the Sunny. But here Jinbei's past experience as a captain is kicking in. He saw that a decision needed to be made and he did not hesitate to do what was necessary. Which is great because he does usually act like the new guy on the boat and don't want to ruffle feathers and such. Because he is the crew member with the least seniority, but it's good to see that all of his wisdom and experience is significantly benefiting the crew. But also the established hierarchy is still there because Jinbei is the first to make the decision, but then Zoro shouts the order and Brook obeys him. So there's some very nice Zoro-Jinbei synergy happening here. And then we finally have an actual conversation between Luffy and Emmet, who refers to Luffy as Joy Boy. And that's just fascinating. Emmet doesn't say, there you are, the man who inherited the will of Joy Boy. It is I, Robot, and I would like to assist your cause, good sir. He doesn't say any of those words. Instead, he goes, yo, Joy Boy, great to see you again. So either Luffy looks identical to Joy Boy, which he probably does, but that's too easy of an answer. Something even deeper could be going on here to do with actual reincarnation at this point, where Luffy isn't remembering his past life / past lives plural, because this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. When Gear 5th was first brought to us, Zunesha said that there was no mistake and that Joy Boy was here. And at the time, I took that to mean the heartbeat that Joy Boy possessed, that whatever that aspect of Joy Boy was now within Luffy, but maybe Zunesha was being much more literal than I gave him credit for. And it's not like it's being used as a title either. Emmet's not saying, I would like to fight for the Joy Boy. He acts like he knows Luffy personally. And there's a very interesting play of people happening here, if that is indeed a thing. Because Luffy reports to Dory and Broggy that Emmet says that he's going to protect Joy Boy, but they don't necessarily know who or what a Joy Boy is, because the name they know is the sun god Nika. So we have a situation where Luffy, the Giants, and Emmet are kind of referring to the same person. I mean, also kind of not, because they're three separate entities as presented to us, but also, yeah, we don't really know that. There's a lot of vagaries about this whole thing, but they're all referring to the same general concept, and yet each and every group thinks that they're talking about different people. And something adorable about this scene is when Emmet sees that Luffy doesn't realize he's talking about him, and he performs a classic manzai comedy backhand, which is a lot less obvious because he's a robot, but this action is called a tsukomi, and you see it all the time in anime. Tsukomi means retort, and it's usually calling out something stupid said by another character, with one of the most common tsukomi gestures being the forehand or the backhand. But it can also extend to much more over-the-top stuff like throwing objects and just engaging in brutally hilarious animated violence. But this is a very important moment for Emmet that will definitely get lost in translation in the West, because it's showing that Emmet has a strong personality and a knack for comic timing. He isn't just some huge, bulky, sad robot programmed to be serious, efficient, and again sad. He is a living, breathing being. And part of what makes this so funny is that he's doing this over-the-top comic gesture, but his facial expression doesn't change at all, because it can't. And you know what? Emmet's also gonna have a lot of trouble pulling off this comic timing if the Five Elders keep pulling off his arms. But Emmet gets another cool comedic moment where it looks like he's about to fire a Frankie-style strong right or a weapons left, but it doesn't work because his systems have degraded over the past couple of 100 years. And there's just a close-up of Emmet's face with the best oh shit expression he can muster as a robot. It's just fantastic, and I'm a bit sad that we're only now getting this sort of stuff from him, because it would seem that we are mere moments away from the demise of Emmet, right at the second where he's actually starting to showcase himself as a character. So who knows, we probably have a little bit more time with him, but it's not going to be much, because Egghead Island is almost over. However, on that note, I wanted to highlight a piece of news that you may or may not have seen, which is a statement made by Oda's editor a couple of days ago where he said, it's been stated that Egghead Island would conclude with a major incident. However, there's still one more big twist to it. I won't say anything else or they'll erase me, lol. And I have no idea what that big twist could be. At the moment, it feels like we've naturally come to the conclusion of all of the big twists and everything that this arc has to offer, but apparently we've got one more massive thing to look forward to. And it may come to us courtesy of Vegapunks' message, which is still going on, and I think this is going to go down in history as one of those notorious weekly reading events. The idea that it's currently taken 5 months to play this message. And in this chapter, Vegapunk didn't drop any bombshells for us, but he did make a very important revelation to the world at large, which was to use Roger's true name, Gold D. Roger. The vast majority of the planet don't know him by that name. They know him as Gold Roger. The world government has been exceptionally careful about hiding Roger's massive D. In fact, when Sengoku announced to the world that Ace was Roger's son, even he used the name Gold Roger. So this is all sorts of mind-blowing to the peoples around the world, because they're now making connections with Garp, Dragon, Blackbeard, and Luffy. And look, if you're watching this video, you'll probably have realized that I didn't talk about the new family name in our Will of D clan, and that's because it's a surprisingly big, complicated, and fascinating topic that we'll be going over in the next video.